Hello, I'm Shar Ward. Sharon Dubit and I have shared an ongoing interest in projects as classroom teachers and as part of Illinois StarNet, a regional support system for all who touch the lives of young children. This interest has been supported through the work of individuals such as Dr. Lillian Katz and Dr. Judy Helm, and inspired by classroom teachers such as Pam Scratton, who with her students began a children's journey investigating the fire truck.
This is a story about young children, ages 3 through 5, and their in-depth investigation of a topic over time. The investigation, the research of the fire truck was their journey. Our journey today is to learn more about the project approach. Dr. Lillian Katz, Dr. Judy Helm, Shar, and I will begin our program with a conversation about projects.
Dr. Judy Helm is co-author of Windows on Learning, Documenting Children's Work, and is the editor of the Project Approach Catalog 1 and 2. She is an associate professor in the College of Education at National Louis University, Wheeling, Illinois. Dr. Lillian Katz is Professor Emerita of Early Childhood Education at the University of Illinois, where she is the director of the Air Clearinghouse. Dr. Katz authored Engaging Children's Minds, the Project Approach, along with Sylvia Chard. This book, published in 1989, serves as a model for the project approach.
Dr. Helm and Dr. Katz are the co-authors of the newly released book entitled Young Investigators, the Project Approach in the Early Years, published by Teachers College Press. The Fire Truck Project is Chapter 7 in this book. These resources will be listed in the credits. We hope this program will encourage and support you in your own investigation of the project approach.
Dr. Katz, what is a project?
A project is a piece of research that children do. It's an investigation which normally takes a period of time, week at least, but usually longer, where children don't just cover the subject, they uncover the subject, exploring, finding answers to questions they have about the topic, whatever the topic is. So it is really early research. But the children take a lot of responsibility for what will be studied, what questions they will find answers to, and how to do it.
I think another thing about the project is what we're talking about in this video is the project approach. And the project approach, I mean, there are many ways to do projects, but the project approach, as defined by Dr. Katz and Dr. Chard, is really looking at sort of a system. There's a structure to it. It has 3 phases. There is a way that a teacher can elicit what the children know and then help support their research. And it gives you a structure. It is an approach to curriculum.
Dr. Katz, how is a project different from a theme?
The theme usually is picked out by the teacher. It's a broad topic like spring. And so the teacher tries to think about it. What are all the different things we can do about spring? We can talk about colors, we can write little stories, we can read good books. By the way, they're good ones. It's not harmful, it's just not an investigation. Mm-hmm. But if you say, how are the trees around this building going to change between, let's say, March and June, then you've got a context in which questions, predictions can be made, and you can actually go regularly do systematic observations. Sometimes I think of a theme as a sort of, well, here's a topic, what bag of tricks can I use on this topic? It's not bad, it just doesn't give children a context for initiative, for taking responsibility for the work accomplished, who's going to observe what, who's going to draw which parts, and so forth, all the things that we expected with a project.
I remember as a teacher, I was the one that got excited when I was using a thematic approach. I was excited about gathering this bag of tricks.
And mostly you as a teacher did most of the creative thinking, most of the problem solving, and most of the integration of learning happened. And in a project, much of this responsibility then becomes a part of what the child is making decisions about. You can usually tell the difference between a project and a theme or thematic unit If you just ask, what questions did the children come up with for investigation? What did the children want to know?
Dr. Helm, who are the young investigators?
We define young investigators really as children, from about the age of 3 through 6, who are just beginning to understand literacy, becoming interested in literacy, but they don't really have the skills so they can use literacy for all their research.
Can all children become young investigators?
When we're talking about all children being investigators, I'm thinking about the variety of different children we have in the classroom, and we're supporting children with special needs to be, whenever possible, learning with their peers. How does that all play out when you have multi-age grouping, when you have different ability levels? Is that going to work?
The project approach is especially helpful approach to curriculum for children with special needs. Several districts that I work with that have children with special needs in inclusion classrooms and even in self-contained classrooms in which they are able to use a lot of the project approach. One of the reasons is that the project approach has children, and all children aren't doing exactly the same thing. So you'll have a group working on building, and a group working on doing research, and a group working on drawing, and different children will be doing those things that they're most interested and most motivated to do. And so there's lots of opportunity to incorporate individual children's needs and to meet what their curriculum goals are.
The other side of this is that it's important for the children in the group who are not special needs children to learn how to incorporate and include their peers who have special needs in the work. And so one of the responsibilities of teachers is to teach children how to include other children who are at different levels of ability. And also, by the way, to say to the younger children, I can't help you right now with whatever it is, writing a word or something like that, but ask Jimmy, I'm sure he'll be glad to help you when he has a minute. So as soon as you increase the range of ability in a class, you increase the number of teachers.
Part 2, the Fire Truck Project.
A good example of a project where children of different ages and abilities work together as young investigators is the Fire Truck Project that took place in Bright Beginnings. Bright Beginnings is a pre-K program for children at risk under supervision of the Woodford County Special Education Association. It is located in Eureka, Illinois. Pam Scranton and her associate teacher, Brenda Wiles, work there with 18 3- and 4-year-olds. Children with special needs are fully included in their classroom. The children participate 4 days a week in a half-day program. Mrs. Scranton had been doing projects with children for 4 years before this project. However, the Fire Truck Project was her first project in this school, and more importantly, it was the first project for her children and their parents. It began with children's interest and is a good example of how a project can begin with a catalytic event, something that happens that sparks the children's interest. It started when Pam and the children went on a walk and the children saw a fire truck parked right next to the school. The children began to talk excitedly, to point and to ask questions. Some children just stopped walking and they stared. One of the firefighters was kind enough to come over to the children and answer their questions for them. And that was the beginning of the Fire Truck Project, which Pam is going to tell you about now.
Our children were just so excited. They wanted to know, what's that? What's that? What's that button for? Can I put your boots on? Can I try your hat on? They were so excited that we came back into the classroom and I asked them, do you want to learn more about the fire truck? Do you want to go maybe visit the fire truck? And, oh yes, let's go teacher, let's go see the fire truck. So that's how it started. I like to do projects with children because I think it's exciting watching them construct their own knowledge base, watching them decide what interests them the most and then going after it, investigating it, asking questions about it. I like seeing children excited about what they're doing, excited about what they're learning, and I like watching them almost on fire because they can't get the questions out fast enough and they can't get the materials in their hands fast enough to represent what they're learning as they're investigating a topic. I think it's just the best way for children to learn and to grow and for their brains to develop. And I like watching them. It's exciting for me to watch children construct their own knowledge. What I wanted was for them to begin to ask their own questions, to think about their own learning. I wanted them to stop and think and form their own questions about what they wanted to know. So the webbing, helped us do that. This was the first time they webbed. So we really had to sit down and talk about, what do you want to know when we go to the fire truck? What are you wondering about? What are you thinking about when we go to the fire truck? What do you want to ask the firefighter when we go to the fire truck? I wanted them to start getting exposed to that, being able to come back to the classroom after we had been to the field experience and organize what they had learned and record their information and start to represent what they had learned and what they continued to learn as they investigated more about the topic. So I guess representation and getting the kids to the point where they could think about their own learning. The very first thing we did after we decided, yes, this was what we wanted to do, we sat down with the children in a small group and we got a big piece of chart paper out and I asked them, what do you already know? What do we already know about a fire truck? Assessing their prior knowledge, trying to get an idea about where we were starting from. And we just listed everything they knew about a fire truck on a language chart. And then later that same day, we sat down with the small group again and we did the webbing, where we put the word fire truck and they made me change it. I wrote fire station at first because then my idea, that's where we were going, to the fire station. And one of the children said, no, teacher, fire truck. We want to know about fire truck. And so, at that point I thought, they're controlling, they're guiding the learning. They don't want to know what happens in a fire station necessarily. They want to know about the fire truck. So I wrote the word fire truck down and we started talking. Well, what do you want to know? What are we going to do when we get there? What questions are you going to ask the firefighter? What are you wondering about? And I could not write fast enough to get all their questions. They had so many things listed on that web. I was writing very quickly and the children were, taking turns back and forth. And it was the first time since we'd started school that I saw them really talking to each other instead of talking at each other. Jordan brought up the fact that he wanted to see that thing that winds the hoses up. And Evan said, you mean the steering wheel? And Jordan said, no, that thing that winds the hoses up. Jordan knew what he meant. Evan didn't know what he meant. And they were talking back and forth instead of directing their questions at me. So I was really pleased with that webbing experience. It was their first webbing experience, and it was the first time I'd asked them to think about what they wanted to learn. When the fire truck project first began, we were doing the initial prior assessment of their knowledge and webbing the fire truck project. I brought in some books, some real books with real photographs of fire trucks, just to give them a jumping point to start from. Oh look, there's the ladders. Do we want to know about ladders? How many ladders are there on a fire truck? Just to stimulate their vocabulary and to stimulate their thinking processes. The books were really helpful. We read books during morning group time. We used the books during small group, had them out. We'd open the pages up. For example, when Jordan was talking about that wind-up thing, we tried to find the wind-up thing. We couldn't find it, but we tried to find the wind-up thing on one of the photographs in a book of the fire truck. So that was really helpful. The children wanted to know, one of the most interesting questions was, the children wanted to know if you had to be an engineer to drive a fire truck. So we had that question down on our web. Do you have to be an engineer to drive a fire truck? They wanted to know how fast it could go. How fast can the fire truck go? They wanted to know about the lights, what makes the lights come on and what makes the big siren. They wanted to know about the different materials on the truck, the items, ladders, the axes. Although they necessarily didn't have the vocabulary at that time, they used a lot of phrases like, that thing that They didn't have the vocabulary yet because we hadn't been on the field experience. They wanted to know about the firefighter. They wanted to know if the firefighter ate all his dinners. You know, that was one of the questions. Does he eat all his dinners at the fire truck? You know, does the firefighter have kids? You know, they wanted to know about the firefighter. Well, we prepared the kids for the field experience by talking to them about what was going to happen and the plans that we had made together for that field experience. We talked about what we wanted to do, what they were most interested in, and then before the actual day of the field experience, Mrs. Wiles and I divided the children into two groups. The first group was the project group, and it consisted mostly of the older 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, and even some 5-year-olds. And these children would be responsible for the actual investigation of the fire truck and recording what they had learned. They would be doing field sketches, they would be graphing, asking questions of the expert, recording the answers. They were really responsible for the actual investigation. The other group consisted mostly of the younger 3-year-olds, and Mrs. Wiles, my associate teacher, took that group. And those children were actually more involved in the manipulative aspects of the field experience. They tried on the firefighter gear, and they got to climb on top of the fire truck and manipulate all of those buttons and levers. The initial field experience is where they did a lot of their investigating. Before we went on the field experience, we sat down together and decided together what questions we wanted to ask the firefighter. We actually wrote the questions down on little 3x5 cards, and we clipped them to their clipboards that had their paper where they were going to do their field sketches. So they had to decide for themselves what questions did they want to know. And then each child was responsible. But the actual investigating and answering these questions happened on the field experience. The fire station is really close to our classroom, so we walked. We had parent volunteers that went with us, besides myself and my associate teacher. We had previously divided the children into two groups. We got there, and Brenda's group went off to explore the fire truck, and my group sat down with the firefighter, who was our expert for that day, who answered the children's questions. The children were responsible for asking the question that was on their 3x5 card. They were responsible with adult help for recording the answer, either by writing the answer or by drawing a sketch of what the firefighter, the expert's answer was to their question. The project group sketched the fire truck. They graphed the materials that they were wondering about on the fire truck. We had graphed several times before, doing a picture graph and a bar graph, but this was the first time they'd used tallies, and they did really well with it. The children spent at least 10 or 15 minutes graphing the parts of the fire truck that they were wondering about on their web. There were lots of parts on the web where they asked, how many ladders are there? How many hoses? Do they have a lot of windows? Do the windows go up and down with a button, or do you have to roll the windows down? So we spent a lot of time graphing the fire truck, and they had an already made up graph that I had made up for them with a picture of a tire and a column for them to make their tally marks, and a picture of the wheels, the tires, and a picture of the windows and how many, and a column for them to make their tally marks. So they would take their clipboards and just walk around the fire truck and count how many ladders are there. One of the firefighters even took down the ladders for the children so they could count the ladders individually, because there's lots of ladders on a fire truck. The children had to have one-to-one correspondence to do the tally graph, and they were, for the most part, very successful. And they really enjoyed counting as they got higher and higher. There's 8 windows on this fire truck. Just amazement, you know, as they started to count the hoses. The firefighter said, oh, I'm going to have to bring them down. There's a lot of hoses on this fire truck. So as their counting grew, they just got more and more excited about putting those tally marks down and recording the information the right way. And that was also something I collected for their work sampling portfolios, because it showed one-to-one correspondence. So that was nice, that a lot of my work sampling comes out of the project work. The field sketching was hard at first, because I'd asked them to sit down in front of the fire truck with this blank piece of paper and this clipboard. And the fire truck was so big and so daunting to them that they had trouble at first. It was really hard for them to represent what they were seeing on this big blank piece of paper because that fire truck had so many things on it. It was so big. So we had to sit down and we had to talk about the fire truck. We had to point out things that we had to kind of break it down a little bit for them at first because this was their first representational experience. So we sat down and we said, okay, you know, and I heard a lot of, I can't do it, teacher. I can't draw this fire truck. It's too big. There's too many things. There's too many ladders on the fire truck. So we sat down and we said, and I talked with them and I said, okay, let's talk about the fire truck. Let's talk about something that's really big that you can draw. You know, and they looked around and my eyes just went to the tires and I thought, okay, I know they can do the tires. The tires are on the bottom of the fire truck. Maybe from there they can build on their sketch. So that's what we started with. I told them, you know, go stand by those tires. Look how big they are. Look how many there are. I bet you can draw those tires. I bet we can put those tires on your paper. And they could. That was something they knew they could do. They could draw a round tire and they could count how many were on there. They knew they were standing next to it. They knew how big they were. So that made them feel successful.
Now, let's think about the truck, the body of the truck. Remember, think about a rectangle for the body of the truck. Think about where you're going to put the tires, the round tires. Okay, I see that.
I think teacher coaching is a vital part of project work and a vital part of representation. It's the teacher's responsibility to support that child, to scaffold that child as they're learning to represent. And my just sitting there with them and helping them break that fire truck down where it wasn't so big and it wasn't so daunting to them, help them get past that first initial, I can't do it, I can't draw this fire truck. While the project group was busy recording the answers, sketching the fire truck, graphing the aspects of the fire truck, Mrs. Wow's group was doing all the thematic play on the fire truck. These children were mostly the younger children, and they weren't ready to represent what they're learning what they were learning on paper. They weren't ready to do that sketching and that graphing, but they could represent what they were learning through their dramatic play. So that's what they did. They got on the fire truck, they drove the fire truck with the steering wheel, they got to turn on buttons and listen to what happens when they turned on the buttons. They were learning through their dramatic play. After their project work, their recording of their information and their field sketches and graphing were finished, the children got to get in the fire truck. The firefighter let them crawl inside, sit down in the driver's seat. They moved the steering wheel. One of our little boys, Gavin, got to turn on the sirens and flip on the lights, and 2 or 3 of them got to be up there at a time, and as they were up there, you could see their eyes and their wonderment at all these buttons and all these levers, and lots of questions. What does this button do? What does this lever do? And the firefighter, the expert, was just wonderful about patiently answering their questions and even letting them manipulate the buttons and the levers. You know, always making sure that what they were touching was safe for them to be touching, but really good about letting the kids manipulate that fire truck and finding out what it felt like to be sitting clear high up in this driver's seat. And how high up were you, Gavin, when you looked down in that window? Can you see me waving at you down here? And really physically feeling what it feels like to be in that fire truck. I had brought in a refrigerator box, hoping that they would want to construct with it. The next day, the children came in just full. Remember this, just full of remembering what they had seen the previous day. And I had set this big refrigerator box in the middle of our art center, moved away the chairs, moved away the table, and just set this box in the middle. So, of course, they were wondering, you know, the minute they walked in and were hanging up their coats, what's the box for? What's the box for? What are we going to do with the box? And I said, you know, I'm wondering, you know, what do you be thinking about what you can do with that box? I'm wondering if you have any ideas. I was sitting there hoping that they would get to the point where they would transfer all they were talking about and all that they had experienced the day before into the beginnings of representation, into that box. And they never really got to that point on their own. I had to finally steer them kind of in that direction. I said something like, you know, you guys have so much information about a fire truck. You really learned a lot yesterday. You know where the lever water buttons go. You know where the buttons go to turn on the siren. You know where the axe goes on the fire truck. I wonder if you could build a fire truck. And that's all it took. You know, I wonder if you could build a fire truck. Oh yeah, we can build a fire truck. We can use buttons and we can make a lever and just just answer after answer. And yeah, we can do this and we can do this. And I just could barely rein them in. I mean, all it took from me was just one question. You know, I wonder if you could build a fire truck. And right away, it got them thinking, and their brains started thinking about, yeah, we can do that. We saw it. We know where those buttons go. The children used the information that they gathered on the field experience to help them with their construction of the fire truck. They used their field sketches, the graphs, and the actual video to help them remember the certain aspects of the fire truck. We also used all the books that we'd gathered before we made our list of questions. We read those stories a lot during morning group time, during small group time. We opened and tried to find the pages and vocabulary they needed as they were constructing the fire truck. For example, Jordan wanted to know more about that thing that winds up the hoses. So we looked and looked and looked for it in books, but we couldn't find it. We used the video again and again and again to revisit the fire truck so that the kids could remember all the aspects as they were constructing. They saw on the video, they saw the buttons and the levers as they were building the dashboard, and it really jogged their memory. And they started saying things like, hey, we could use that for the buttons, or this could be for the siren, this could be for the steering wheel, this button could be for the lights. They brought cork and bottle caps and buttons and spray can lids, and they just took off. After that, all I had to do was stand back and make sure I had enough glue and paint. Again, the children used the video to help them remember. They remembered the steering wheel that they had forgotten as they were building the fire truck. So the next 2 days, 2 children started working on the steering wheel. Ashley and Katie were designing the siren and the lights that went on top of the fire truck. And David and Evan, who were working inside on all these buttons and levers, got into a very lively discussion with Ashley that her lights were wrong. She had taken a Kleenex box and painted it and glued it up on top for the lights. And David at one point stuck his head out and said, "That is wrong, Ashley." And Evan said, "Yeah, they don't look like that. The lights don't look like that. They're shiny." So Ashley, they got into a discussion between, but these 2 girls and these 2 boys got into a discussion about these lights. And I was holding the video camera recording them discussing this. And, as a teacher, it's hard for you. Sometimes you want to step in there and say, "Now, David, you need to use your nice words with Ashley." But as a person that does projects with kids, I knew I had to just step back and let them talk that out, that is such a valuable part of doing projects. The girls took their lights back off, and they went over and they found some lights that they thought were shiny. And David and Evan came back out and they said, "No, that's not right. Those don't look right either." So the very next day, David and Evan came in. No, it was David. David came in with some aluminum pie tins, new, shiny aluminum pie tins, and they took them over to Ashley and Katie in group time before we started our morning group activities and said, these would make good lights. And Ashley looked at me and said, yeah, they're shiny, they'll make good lights. And so that day the girls went back to the lights and they first tried painting them. Well, the paint didn't stick to the aluminum pie tin. So they wanted them to be red and blue like the lights they had seen on the field experience. And the paint wasn't working. It just chipped off. As soon as it dried, it chipped off. So the next day they came back and they figured out they could cut out paper, construction paper, in the color that they wanted, the blue and red, and they could glue it inside the pie tin. So they had the shininess and they had the color that they wanted for the lights. So then Gavin used the video to revisit the ladders, and he remembered about putting ladders on the fire truck. He began to work on the ladders. So then they got to the point where they had to fasten those lights onto the fire truck. They tried glue at first. Well, glue didn't work. The pie tins fell right off. So I had some clear, great big wide clear tape that the boys were using to fasten some of their levers onto the inside of the fire truck. Ashley found that tape and figured out she could tape the back of those aluminum pie tins to the truck, and that satisfied them, and the lights were on the fire truck. As Gavin was continuing to work on the ladders, he tried a lot of different things to help him build them. He tried construction paper, he tried blocks, but then he settled into making them out of toilet paper tubes and those long gift wrap tubes, which he taped together to make his fire truck ladders. The children who weren't involved in the construction aspect of the fire truck were still involved in the fire truck project. They were mostly my younger 3-year-olds, maybe some of my younger 4-year-olds, who were involved in the actual dramatic play. That's how they were investigating and learning about the fire truck. And this took place mostly in my dramatic play and block area. Those children would go and get chairs and line the chairs up and use the equipment that the firefighters had given us on the field experience. And they would put the hats on and use the props that they had given us and the firefighter boots, and they would play fire truck. And that was their way of investigating the fire truck. They used lots of books. We had a lot of good literature about the fire truck, and those books were used a lot in the dramatic play, in the block area. They were still painting at the easel. We had the colors of the fire trucks that we had seen on the field experience set up on the easel. Children's sketches were displayed, their field sketches, their graphs of the fire truck. And of course the fire truck group, the construction group, was reporting on a daily basis how the construction was going, the problems, who could bring in what the next day to continue the construction. Once the kids had finished the dashboard, there was a big discussion on whether the fire truck was actually finished and they could start playing in it. They were really anxious to start playing. But we looked at the video once more and they saw they'd forgotten the hoses, so they quickly began constructing the hoses. One child, David, noticed that there was an axe on the back of the fire truck, and he made the axe. As that group of constructors, the children that were constructing the fire truck got finished, felt like they had finished the fire truck, we put it in the middle of our large play area, the block area, which is a large area in our room that can take a lot of movement. And those children that constructed the fire truck were just ready to play. And they got, the first day, it was a Thursday, they got in there and they played some really good play. Had the fire hats on, going to the fires. Their play didn't last very long, though. I thought that these children who had spent so many weeks constructing this fire truck would just play forever in it. And they really only played for 2 days in the fire truck. They were done. After you could tell they were just finished with this part of the representation. And that's when that group moved to the sketching and the mural work. And as those children moved away from the fire truck, these 3-year-olds who were not very involved with the representational part of the project looked at this fire truck that was now standing empty, and you could just see their eyes, yes, all right, it's our turn. And they got in there, and just this incredible play started to happen with this group of 3-year-olds in the fire truck. This is the way they're representing what they know about the fire truck. They're not to the point in their development where they can sketch or graph or construct. They're learning in that way. But they know what happens on a fire truck. They saw it. After they felt finished with the fire truck and play had begun in the fire truck, that's when their interest turned to looking at their field sketches. And we took their field sketches back out and we sat down in a small group and I gave them new pieces of paper and I said, now that you've been to the fire truck and now that you've built the fire truck and you figured out where the buttons go, you figured out how the ladder hangs on the fire truck, let's draw this fire truck again. Let's think about this fire truck again and draw it on a new piece of paper. And that day didn't go very well. They looked at that blank piece of paper and their old field sketch, and they reproduced exactly what they had done on the field sketch. They took that field sketch and reproduced it again. So I thought to myself, what am I not doing? What am I not giving them? What am I not scaffolding for them that they can't think about the fire truck and think about how they would change it? So the next day, when we tried this again, I did it in a small group again with the same group of children, except this time I took them away from the table, and we got clipboards, and we sat down on our rug, and we got the tape that I had taped of the fire truck, and we put it in the TV, and we watched the video of the fire truck again. And that just seemed to stimulate them, and they would point out and yell, oh yeah, there are the ladders, there the ladder, oh there's the axe over there, it's on the back. Oh, remember it said fire truck. And that was the first time they had really picked out those letters, fire truck. And those letters were represented on their second and third redraws. The mural was another way the children represented what they were learning about the fire truck, and they took their field sketches again that they had done on the fire truck field experience, brought them over to the art center with a great big piece of paper, and we talked about how they could put the fire truck onto this great big piece of paper. And basically 2 children worked on this project. Ashley and Gavin were the most interested in painting this mural. And I asked them, do you want to change some things about this fire truck on your sketches before you put it onto the big piece of mural paper? Yes, they wanted to do that. So they got new pieces of paper. They sketched again what they wanted the mural to look like. And that took a day. Then the next day they came back all ready to transfer this idea onto their big piece of paper. As the play started to wind down, as we started to move into a different interest, it was into December. We were getting into some candle making, and I could tell the interest in the fire truck was really waning. The interest just wasn't there anymore. So I sat down with that project group again in a small group, and I asked them, you know, you guys have learned so much about a fire truck. How are we going to share that learning? How are we going to share what we know about a fire truck with other boys and girls, or with your moms and dads? You know, do you have some ideas about what we can do? And so we took a big piece of chart paper out again, and we listed their ideas. Somebody said we could make a book. Someone else said we could have a play. We could do a play about the fire truck. Someone said, let's make a movie about the fire truck. Well, that idea of making a movie was just a hit, and everyone voted to make a movie. The very next day, I met again with that small project group, and I asked them, okay, you want to make a movie. You decided to make a movie. Who's going to do the talking? You know, they had to decide who's going to talk about the hoses, who's going to talk about the ladders, who's going to talk about the sirens and the lights. So this small project group sat down and they talked with each other, and one of the children became kind of the director. I call the leader, and David would say, Evan, I think you should do the hoses because you talked about the hoses, and Gavin, you should do the ladders because you built the ladders, and Ashley, you should do the lights because you talked about the lights, and I'll do the buttons because I put all those buttons and levers in there. And so they talked and they agreed about what they were going to say, and we talked a little bit about the kind of voice you have to use when you make a movie. You have to use a little bit louder voice. We came back into the classroom during small group time, and we actually made the movie. We put the fire truck in a position, and the children decided where they were going to stand, who was going to go first, and they made a movie about the fire truck. And the day after that, we invited some boys and girls from another class and the other children in our class to sit down and have a movie day. And we popped popcorn and we watched the fire truck movie. And that's how they shared their learning.